The play clock at 2 as Rogers takes the snap. Pocket collapses, Rogers rolls left, has to heave up the prayer for the end zone. Jump ball, Janis is there, and Jeff Janis pulls it in! Jeff Janis with the catch!
Here we go. Jenkins will trigger. 4.7 seconds to go. Inbound to Ryan Arcidiacono. At half court with 3 seconds. Ryan Arcidiacono flips to Jenkins. 3 for the win. It's good! It's good! Jenkins hits the 3 to win the national championship for the first time in 31 years. You can call the Cats champions of the Jenkins 3 at the buzzer.
Spieth, a par, and a birdie on this hole this week. Back right hole location today, and Spieth starts it on the front, and it trickles down and into Rays Creek. Jordan Spieth has hit his tee shot on 12 into Rays Creek. Jordan Spieth, the leader for the moment. The third shot punched into Rays Creek again. He took a huge chunk of Augusta real estate, and the ball goes into the creek once more.
It is a voice that you know well. From Westwood One Radio, whether it's NFL, whether it's NCAA basketball, whether it's the Masters. He is nothing if not versatile. Kevin Kugler. Met him in Houston, begged him to come on the show, and now that he's gotten through his crazy stretch, we have agreed. And so he joins us now here on After Hours with Amy Lawrence, CBS Sports Radio. Man, Kevin, quite a start to your 2016 with the Aaron Rodgers Hail Mary, the Chris Jenkins buzzer beater, then, of course, the Masters. And since that's most recent, let's talk about that. You were posted up there at Amen Corner. We're all watching on TV, but I'm interested in what you saw and what you heard being right there at that 12th hole.
Well, it's so interesting, Amy, because when you're at Augusta National, you don't have your phone, you don't have your iPad, you don't have any of this stuff to get real-time updates. So nobody there knows what's going on until a delay. So you have a 5 or 10 minute delay of what's happening on the course. So we're watching and we have a monitor, and we're listening obviously to our radio broadcast, so we know what's going on. So Spieth goes to 7 under after 9. And he's making the turn, and he's got a 5-shot lead. And they post, every time they post the score on a Sunday, the whole crowd that's gathered there oohs and ahs and reacts. So you're sitting there watching the golf that's happening in front of you, and if you look down when they post a score and the crowd reacts, you think you've missed something. You're like, what happened? What happened? Oh, right, they just posted a score. So they post the score of Jordan Spieth at 7 under at Amen Corner. And a guy across, there's 2 grandstands. We're on one, and then there's another grandstand across the way. And a guy across the grandstand goes, "It's over. It's over." And so, and I didn't necessarily disagree with him at this point. I'm thinking, yeah, you're probably right. He's got a 5-shot lead with 9 holes to go. This looks pretty good. Then he bogeys 10, and then he's coming down 11, and we're calling his struggle at 11. He had a problem, and he ends up with a bogey there. So all of a sudden, he's lost 2 shots. Willett, meanwhile, is gaining ground behind him. So that 5-stroke lead is down to 1. And he gets to 12, and he hits it in Rays Creek. And the whole crowd just, oh. And then when he drops it and hits it fat out of the drop zone, there was the momentary groan, but it was not as much a groan this time as it was a gasp, like you had just seen something that you didn't necessarily want to see. Like in the horror movie when they jump out from behind the closet and you're thinking, oh, it's like, oh my gosh, that gasp just all through the crowd. And there are thousands of people either sitting or standing there. And then he hits it over the green into the sand, and then he chips back within 4 or 5 feet, and he taps it in for his 7. And you could have heard a pin drop as he walked off that green. I mean, people just sat there in stunned silence. Like, what did we see here? What has happened here? And the feeling that you had at home as you're watching this, I promise you, was only magnified by about a factor of 15 when you're sitting there watching it in person unfold in front of you. It was unbelievable. You know how people have felt when they've watched big meltdowns in golf tournaments before. Now that you've sat through one like that, that was remarkable and completely unexpected for a guy that had been dominating this tournament for the last really 3 years. I know he'd only won one of the two previous, but he'd led the thing for 7 straight rounds and had a 5-shot lead with 9 to go. It was stunning.
Kevin, we hear so much about that par 3 12th, how difficult it is. It claimed a lot of victims during the Masters. Rory McIlroy got to Amen Corner on Saturday and essentially went MIA. He was never heard from again. We maybe can't see it on TV, what these guys are struggling with. So you there in person, what makes that hole so difficult?
Well, it's the wind, really. I mean, that's there's the par 411 is the longest hole on the course. It's 505 yards. So you have the length, but with today's hitters, the length isn't such a big deal. But that wind was so hard to read down there for these guys. And these are pros. And the wind, you look at the flag at 11 and it's blowing one direction. They look out to 12 and the flag looks like it's blowing in the opposite direction. And then it swirls because you're in that corner down there, all guarded by trees. I mean, it's an ingenious design. But it is a nefarious design as well because these guys, it's so hard to read for a person who is making their living doing this. I mean, it's remarkable to me that somebody who is so good at this, and look, make no mistake, I don't care what these guys shot. I don't care if they were at 85 or 68. They're the best there is, and they are having trouble reading this and misjudging it, a club long, a club short, mishitting it. There's just something about Augusta National, the way it plays. And then what also makes it tough is how challenging those greens are. You don't get the sense on television all of the undulations and all of the curves and all of the tricky little shots that you have to hit on those greens. Those putts are almost impossible. And you combine the putts with the wind. Bubba Watson got burned by a wind gust on the green as he putted. We saw another ball get moved earlier in the week with one of those 20-mile-an-hour wind gusts down there. So you've got these greens that are fast and they have undulations in them, and you also have this wind blowing, and it's difficult to read on a good day. It's a real challenge down there, and there's reasons why they call it Amen Corner, and one of them is if you get out of that, you feel like you're saying amen, but it's not a very easy thing to do to get out of there unscathed, especially when the wind was going like it was most of the weekend.
I think it's the first time in my life that I've ever heard a set of greens at a golf tournament described as crusty. That's what we heard going into the weekend, right? Saturday, the winds are wicked and the greens are crusty. That added to the challenge. And you know what? Whatever adjective you want to use to describe a green that is going to be giving nightmares to golfers for weeks to come, that's the adjective you should use because those greens were so hard to deal with. And then as the wind blows, it's sucking the moisture right out of there. So those are getting faster and faster and faster. I don't know how many times I saw a putt this weekend at 11, 12, or 13 where the golfer barely brought the blade of the putter back to make contact. I mean, it was just the slightest of taps. And that ball goes zooming because those things were just, they were so fast and the read is so tough. It's a really tricky combination. I mean, you had quite a week. How does a play-by-play broadcaster go from a dome, a stadium, 74,340 people for a buzzer beater to win a national championship in basketball to your hushed voice, your golf voice at Amen Corner? Where are you when you're out there describing those 3 holes?
Basically, we sit at the top of the grandstands. So imagine just like a big bleacher, and all the fans, or as they call them in Augusta, the patrons, are sitting there row by row by row, and we are at the top behind a plexiglass screen. But it's basically just plexiglass on my right, plexiglass in front of me, and then on the left. So you're kind of enclosed. So when you're talking in your low golf play-by-play voice, you don't necessarily get heard like you would if you're calling in your basketball play-by-play voice, which would definitely be heard and definitely be causing problems for the golfers. Look, the last thing I want is for any golfer on 11 green or 12 tee to look up at the grandstand and go, that guy is too loud. So luckily I've been able to avoid that over the last several years. It's never actually happened, and I hope it continues. But, yeah, you temper you're enthusiastic without going over the top when it comes to golf, and you're enthusiastic, and it's okay to occasionally go over the top when it comes to basketball.
We're spending a few minutes with Kevin Kugler, Westwood One play-by-play voice, fresh off of Amen Corner at the Masters, but was also there for Chris Jenkins' buzzer beater as Villanova won the men's college basketball national championship. So your perspective, 4.7 seconds to go. You're there courtside. Let's go through it again. What was it like?
Well, and you think when Marcus Page hits the shot that's the shot. You think as a broadcaster or as a basketball fan, you think, well, there was the big play. I mean, that was the big one, and now they'll come down, they'll hoist up some sort of prayer. North Carolina's going to cause them a little problem to slow up their progress up the court. And that's the first thing. They didn't slow up their progress up the court, so they had plenty of time to get that play set and get Chris Jenkins the shot. But you're anticipating, okay, what's going to happen here because this game is tied, and you just saw this crazy Marcus Page shot, and North Carolina's got a little momentum, and then you watch this thing unfold, and I mean, it's one of those plays that moves fast and slow at the same time because it's going up the court and the pace is clicking, and then all of a sudden you see Chris Jenkins, and very reminiscent of, at least from where the shot was, of my first Final Four that I got to call for Westwood One when Mario Chalmers hit a three-pointer on the right wing to send the game to overtime against Memphis, although this one being different, obviously, because it won a game. But it's one of those plays that when you think back on it, you think, man, did that really happen? Did we really just see that wild shot hit from way back by Marcus Page, and then Villanova turns around and goes down the court and wins the game on a three-pointer at the buzzer? I mean, it's the kind of call that you always hope you get the chance to call, and then you really hope that you don't screw it up.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I was about to ask, do you ever worry about screwing up the call? I know some broadcasters script their final calls for big games like this, for the moments that you know the call will be played over and over and over again. But with 4.7 seconds left, there's no way to know what's going to happen or how to script it.
Oh, no. And if you've heard the call, it's obvious I didn't script it because it's essentially just me describing what I saw. No, you can't script big moments. They just happen. I mean, and then you just hope that you're able to describe what's happening. It's different if you're calling it on TV versus calling it on radio. Radio, you've got to describe a little bit more about what has happened. You can't just scream and hope that somebody figures out when they're driving around that, oh, yeah, that guy must have hit a shot or he didn't hit a shot or what. You have to be a little more descriptive about it. But some of the more iconic play-by-play calls in sports history don't have a lot of words to them. I mean, Vern Lundquist, we were talking Masters earlier, Vern Lundquist, yes, sir, is one of the more iconic calls of all time, and it's two words, and that comes from Jack Nicklaus hitting that putt in 1986. And 30 years later, people who are golf fans still know that call. So, you can't psych yourself out because it happens so quickly. You're just calling the game, and you hope you call that play the same way as you called all other big plays in the course of a game. But it's fun. I mean, it is the kind of game that you go into every game hoping you get the chance to call. And rarely do you get a chance to call a game like that. So it was pretty special to be able to be courtside for it.
I got to know, we've played these calls over and over of the Aaron Rodgers Hail Mary, the Jenkins shot, and that Spieth collapse. Which one was the most shocking?
Honestly, I think the Spieth 12th because of what he's done at Augusta National so much and so good over the last 3 years. I mean, he's not really had that kind of a moment. He was playing uneven golf for the last couple of days of that tournament, but he saw the 5-shot lead with 9 holes to go. To me, that's a bigger surprise. Look, Chris Jenkins hitting a 3 to win a game isn't surprising. Aaron Rodgers doing anything in football doesn't surprise me anymore because he's done so much in his career already. But to me, what Jordan Spieth wasn't able to do, close out that tournament, of those 3, that to me was, I was more surprised by that than I was anything else. And there's always a different feeling, too, when it's a guy who is unable to get the job done because there's the sports fan in me who's just a fan of sport, and I have so much admiration for what all of these athletes are able to do in their sport. A lot of things that I could never even hope to do in sport. I have that sport fan in me that also feels bad for guys like Jordan Spieth when it happens because there's just nowhere to escape. It's an individual game, and it's happening on the biggest and grandest stage in golf. And I feel bad for anybody when that kind of thing happens. And I thought, man, this kid's going to have a really hard time afterwards. And I thought he was terrific afterwards, having to fit the coat on the green jacket on Danny Willett and do all the press conferences afterwards. I was impressed with him before that, and I was really impressed with him afterwards.
No doubt. And the fact that he's 22 years old kind of lost on you when you hear him speak and when you think about everything he's accomplished already. So people debate about college versus pro atmospheres, Kevin, and you spend time in both as a play-by-play announcer for Westwood One. So which side of that debate do you fall on? Which is the better atmosphere?
I always lean towards college. Big college atmospheres always seem a little more raucous to me. And there are some NFL ones that obviously would compete with that. Kansas City has a great crowd. Green Bay has a great crowd. I'll leave somebody out and people will be tweeting at me about it as we have this conversation, and I'll have to respond to those tweets and say, I'm sorry I left your team out. But, you know, I've done a lot of cool college football venues, and, you know, I went to a college football school in Nebraska, so it was always about the big college football crowds. And I've always leaned towards college football, college basketball. The great atmospheres can be a little more raucous than what we see at the professional level, but there are exceptions to it. I probably haven't been to all of those, but I'll lean college in most of those conversations.
So I don't do play-by-play nearly as much as you do, Kevin, but I get accused of having a bias all the time. So how much do you get accused of being biased for one team or another?
Every single game. Oh, that Kugler, hey, he hates this team. Oh, every time he calls them, he's rooting against them. Yeah, you know, that it's absolutely true. Whoever your team is, I am rooting against them. I wake up rooting against them. I go to bed rooting against them. In the middle of the game, we'll go to commercial break, and I'll turn to my partner in whatever sport it is, and I'll say, hey, that guy's team, how can we make it sound even worse for that guy? And it's amazing because most of the time, my bias really comes out when one team is doing well and one team is not doing well. And it's obvious that I'm biased against the team that's doing poorly and biased for the team that's doing really well. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that one team is doing really well and one team is doing really poorly, so you talk more about the team that's doing well. But it happens all the time, and I have fun with it. I mean, I am a Cubs fan, and I have never at any point in my life blamed a broadcaster for anything that's happened to the Cubs, and there have been a lot of woeful moments over the years as a Chicago Cubs fan. Most of them, in fact, have been woeful, and never have I blamed the broadcaster. But I get it. Look, if you're a fan, your team's stinking it up in whatever game it is, and this guy's talking good about the other team, wow, he's a jerk too, and he hates my team. I get it.
Ah, yes, fans reserve the right to be completely irrational and illogical, and it's always the media's fault. You can find Kevin Kugler on Twitter at Kevin Kugler, Kugler. Already been an amazing 2016. Great to pick your brain for a few minutes. Thanks so much for the time, Kevin.
Hey,